Schooler. I'm a facilitator for the City of Austin, and I work in the Communications and Public Information Office, and I'm just here to orchestrate our meeting tonight. Our primary goal for tonight is to give you as much information as the department can about the direction it is considering taking with implementation of body-worn cameras. But at this stage, they haven't even solicited a bid yet for body cameras. So you are very much in, I think, the right stage of this process to be able to get as much information as they have to offer on the considerations they have to make for the implementation of this technology, which of course is sweeping the nation. So just to go over what we're going to do tonight, some of you may have gotten, there are some agendas up here if folks need them, but essentially we will hand things over to Chief Acevedo to kind of frame out the issues for us. Commander Eli Reyes will give our overall presentation, the PowerPoint presentation on the policy, and then the bulk of the time is going to be reserved for the questions that you all have for the department. I should say that we opened up a text message line and a Twitter hashtag and did receive some questions via those two channels. The hashtag is hashtag APD body cam, and that's the reason I have the laptop open tonight, just to see what other questions we have. We have at least a half dozen. So if you'd like to submit questions that way, you may, but you can certainly do it the old-fashioned way by raising your hand at the end of the presentation. So we will hand things over when he's ready to Austin Police Chief Art Acevedo. It should be if you switch it on.
All right. Hello? About 2 seconds. It's ready.
Hello. Hi, good evening, everybody. How y'all doing? First of all, I thank you all for being here. The turnout's not quite as big as we would hope, but at least we have quality. So quality is better than quantity, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be here. About 3 years ago, I remember talking to the statesman about body-worn cameras, and I predicted then that within 5 years, every major city in the country would have body-worn cameras. And I think that we are well on our way to making that happen. Body-worn cameras, although I don't think it's a perfect solution to create perfection in law enforcement, because it is an imperfect profession, like society is imperfect and the human condition is imperfect, it will be a great tool in terms of accountability, both, and that's a two-way accountability, and most importantly for transparency and for people to have really good evidence. And so, you know, our history, we've had video cameras in our cars for about 10 years. They started, I've been here about 8.5 years. If you all remember when we got the video cameras initially in the cars, it was a analog system instead of a digital system. It was a system that was a VHS tape, and by the time we got rid of them, it was a system that there was only one company in the world that was making VHS tape, and that was in China. And so it was not a very good system. And if you remember, we had an officer-involved critical incident involving Mr. Sanders, where there were three police cars, two had the cameras off and one had the camera on. And at the time, one of the things that we did is we said it's time for us to move to a better system. And so that was about 6-7 years ago, we moved into a new digital system that actually has automatic triggers. We tested the cameras back in 2011, 2012. We tested some of the body-worn cameras. Unfortunately, at that time, the technology wasn't quite where it needed to be. The battery life and things of that nature, and just wasn't there. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that the law or anything else was right there yet. There was a lot of privacy issues and everything else that I think still have to be worked out on the national level here in the state of Texas. So there's a great evolution in the system. Can you do one more slide to see what you're going to do the overview next, right? But let me just say this. One of the reasons that we've been very methodical is that I think the most important thing when it comes to body-worn cameras in critical incidents is that they actually be on when that critical incident occurs. Since we've had the in-car camera with the automatic triggers, I can't think of any instance where the camera was not on when it was supposed to be on during a critical incident. I think that's huge. It's really important. And so one of the things that we did about 1.5 years ago, I met with different industry leaders, and I challenged them to come up and engineer a system that would integrate with in-car camera systems and would in fact have automatic triggers. And one of the things that we want, especially for the cars with the, when that door opens, the police officer gets out, that body worn camera comes on automatically, and the only way it's off is if the officer physically turns it off, or obviously if there's a malfunction that can be verified with an engineer. And so with that, this is Commander Eli Reyes, who is responsible for our, he's actually in charge of our technology unit and has been intimately involved in the program. And more importantly, I think he might have been a lieutenant up on my office when we were actually testing the cameras early on, and he's actually working on the policy. I want to just acknowledge Council Member Renteria, who's here. Council Member, I think Delia Garza was, in the back. Thank you both for being here, for your leadership, and more importantly, for funding the first phase of the system. We hope to have about 500 cameras deployed by the end of this fiscal year, which obviously ends September 30 of 16. So again, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules, all of you, and coming out and actually listening to the presentation. And we welcome any feedback you might have either here today, or you can actually send us some feedback. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Commander Reyes.
Chief, before you do that, could you introduce your officer who is here to interpret in Spanish for those who would like that service?
Are you doing it? Oh, no. And Vanessa or Brenner is going to be. ¿Hay alguna persona aquí que solamente habla español? ¿Cualquier persona? Okay. Maybe you can do Spanish media. All right.
And before we go to Commander's presentation, I know Councilmember Zimmerman is expected here later, as well as a representative from Councilmember Ora Houston's office.
And I want to also, I'm sorry, our police monitor is here as well. So thank you for being here.
Okay.
All right, can you guys hear me? I got this wireless mic on, so I just want to make sure it's working. So I'm gonna be going over the program here today, and I just want to give you a brief overview of the things that I'm going to be covering for you guys. And so we're going to go over the new state law that was just passed during this last legislative session. We're going to cover some of the highlights of that law, some of the highlights of the APD proposed policy when it comes to body-worn cameras and how it's going to be utilized in the department, some of the specifications that we're going to be looking for when we go out for solicitation here in the next few weeks, and then what the next steps are following that and what you guys can expect to see in the coming months as far as the body camera deployment strategy goes. And then at the end of that, we'll have some questions and answers. So if along the way you guys have a question about something I'm talking about, just write it down or just put it to memory, and then at the conclusion, we'll have a question and answer session, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. So the first thing I want to talk about is the state bill, the law that passed. It defines what a body-worn camera is. And the reason why this is important is because this specific legislation only applies to body-worn cameras. It does not apply to the in-car cameras. It does not apply to our public safety cameras. It only applies to the body-worn camera, and that's going to be defined as a camera that's on the officer's body that's capable of recording video or audio. So it's not going to extend to the car, and it's not going to extend to our public safety cameras. The next thing that's important in the law is it defines what a private space is. A private space is going to be defined as anywhere where someone has a reasonable expectation of privacy. And this is going to become important as we talk about privacy issues when it comes to requesting body camera footage through public information requests. So the law, inside the law, it has some guidelines in there that we have to put into our policy. So as we're crafting our policy, we were very meticulous about making sure that we incorporated all the aspects of the law into our policy. And then we took a lot of our in-car camera policy and put that in there as well. So one of the requirements is the policy has to have a guideline for when the officer can turn the camera on and when they're allowed to turn it off. Another thing is that the camera may only be activated for law enforcement purposes. And the last thing is that it may not require a department to have the officer record for his entire shift. So these are three of the things that are in the law, and these are things that are going to be incorporated into our policy. The last one says that we may not require recording for an entire shift. So that just means that we can't tell an officer, you have to have your body camera on for your entire shift that you're working. So that's not permitted. Some other requirements of the law are training. all officers and all civilian employees that are gonna come into contact with body-worn camera video, or they're gonna be using the body-worn camera system, have to go through training before we can implement the program. So that's gonna include every officer that gets assigned a body camera, all the detectives that are gonna be accessing the footage, the prosecutors at municipal court, county attorney, district attorney's office, anybody that's gonna come into contact with that video or that camera system is gonna have to go through training. The next thing is that all of our body-worn camera videos have to be retained for a minimum of 90 days. So as it stands right now, all our videos are retained for a purpose specified by law. And it's according to the level of the offense which is captured on the video. For example, if it's a traffic stop and you receive a citation, then we keep it for a minimum of 180 days. If it's a misdemeanor offense or a felony, depending on what range of offense that is, we could keep it 2 years or up to 99 years if it was a murder, for example. So those retention standards are set by state law, and the body-worn camera footage will comply with those retention standards as well, but we will keep all videos for a minimum of 90 days, and that's a requirement in the law. So the specific procedures set out in the law lay out some parameters that people have to have when they're requesting body camera footage. So public requests for videos must contain the date and approximate time of the event, the location of the event, and the name of at least one person that's on the recording. And that's one person that's the subject of the recording, not the officer who's recording. So that's gonna give some protections in place for people. So if you're a subject of a recording, people are gonna have these things in order to request those videos. The next thing is when we talk about private space. There's provisions in the law that police may not release any part of a video made in a private space or a recording of a misdemeanor punishable by fine only without written permission from the person involved. Okay? So in a private space, for example, a residence, that recording cannot be released without the written permission of the person involved. And also for a misdemeanor punishable by fine only. So an example of that would be a traffic ticket or a field release citation. The law also makes it a crime to release any video without permission of the agency. And the next thing, which is a provision in the law, is that a video of a use of deadly force by an officer or the investigation of an officer cannot be released to the public until all criminal and administrative process have been completed. So that's a provision in the law as far as releasing videos. When it comes to our proposed policy for body-worn camera, we took a lot of the provisions that are in the law, and we took our in-car camera and we kind of married those together to create what we believe is a comprehensive body-worn camera policy. We've had our in-car systems for many years. That policy has evolved over time, and so by incorporating those two things together, we're coming up with a very comprehensive body-worn camera policy. So one of the things that's going to be required is officers are going to be required to test the body-worn camera system at the beginning of their shift. And they're going to have to test for the video, the audio, and also to make sure that those triggers are working, the ones about automatic activation on the car. If that camera is not functioning properly, we will have extra cameras at the substations for officers to check out so that they can have a functioning camera working while they're on patrol. Some examples of when activation is going to be required are traffic stops, DWI investigation, warrant service at a residence, investigatory stops like a subject stop or a pedestrian stop, and any call for service. So if an officer gets dispatched to a call for service, they're going to be required to turn their camera on. Rapid response. If an incident occurs directly in front of an officer and he's required to take immediate action and he doesn't have time to activate his body-worn camera, he's going to have to activate his camera as soon as practical. So for example, the officers that are working down on 6th Street, if a fight occurred right in front of them and they have to take immediate action, as soon as they're able to turn on their camera, then they're going to be required to turn on their camera. And one of the things that, when we go into the specifications that we're looking for is in our in-car video system, we have what we call a pre-event recording. So when the officer hits the record button on their in-car camera system, it actually records the 30 seconds prior to hitting the record button. That same pre-event recording is going to be required on the body camera. And that's going to be configurable from 30 seconds and sometimes up to 2 minutes. So if the officer is required to engage in some type of action and doesn't have time to hit his record button, when he does hit his record button, it's actually going to back up and record the previous 30 seconds up to 2 minutes. So that's going to be an important feature when we go out for solicitation. Once the body camera is activated, it has to remain active until the incident has concluded. And the incident being concluded means that all arrests have been made and arrestees have been transported to jail, or when there's no further law enforcement action likely to occur. For example, an officer goes to a crash scene, all the information has been exchanged and he's waiting for a tow truck, he'll be permitted to turn off his camera while he's sitting there waiting for a tow truck. Or if he's just simply waiting for a family member to arrive to give somebody a ride home, then he'll be permitted to turn his camera off in those instances. If a citizen requests that an officer stop recording while an officer is responding to a call and taking law enforcement action, the officer is going to explain the policy to the citizen and explain to them that policy doesn't allow him to turn the camera off until all law enforcement action has been completed. The supervisors that are out on patrol are going to be required to conduct random monthly audits of the body-worn camera videos of their officers. So once a month, they're going to have to go watch videos to make sure that officers are complying with policy. Officers are not going to be permitted to make personal copies of any videos. They're not going to be able to make copies for any other third-party person. And no videos will be posted to any social media without authorization from the department. Some of the specifications that we're requesting when we go out for solicitation for body cameras, we talked about this before, is the remote triggers. We want to make sure that in the car, when the officer opens the door, that the camera automatically comes on. We don't want the officer to have to worry about turning the camera on when they're responding to a scene. And so that's very important for us, and that's a requirement. We want the officers to be able to categorize the videos. So what that means is the officer is going to be able to, at the conclusion of the incident, he's going to be able to categorize the video as a DWI stop, or it was a felony offense, or it was a traffic stop. And what that's going to do is that's going to automatically establish the retention period for that video. And it's also going to send it to the appropriate investigative unit for any follow-up involved. The camera must see what an officer sees in daylight or in nighttime. And what that means is that we don't want a camera that's going to enhance the image and give an improper view of what people might think that the officer saw. We want to make sure that the camera actually captures what the officer is seeing and doesn't enhance any lighting or infrared or anything like that, because it's important for evidentiary purposes that the video that the officer is presenting as evidence is actually what he was seeing with his eyes. The battery life of the camera has to last the officer's shift. Our officers here work 10-hour shift. We talked, when we were testing them in 2011 and 2012, the battery life was not long enough to last a whole shift. Battery lives and batteries themselves have evolved over the last few years, and that is available now. We're going to make sure that it lasts the whole shift. Ability to redact videos. In the circumstances when we are going to be releasing videos, we would like to have built into the software program the ability to redact videos, and that's going to give us a quick way to redact videos if there are juveniles on there or protected victims, and that's going to give us the ability to do that quickly. Security features including audit trails and watermarks. So the security features that are going to be required is that the video cannot be tampered with once it's recorded. The officer will not have the ability to tamper the video, edit the video in any way, and an audit trail. So anybody that looks at that video, anybody that watches that video, it's going to put an audit trail on there that, Commander Reyes watched the video on this date and this time. If I was to copy a video, it's going to show that I made a copy of the video. And the watermark is another important feature to us, because if I make a copy of the video, it's going to have a watermark on the video copy that I make that shows that I'm the one that made that copy. So if that copy gets out somewhere else, it's gonna have my information on there, so it's gonna establish where that video came from. So those are some important security features that we're looking for when it comes to the body worn cameras. The next steps that we have is the RFP, which is a request for proposal. That's the solicitation that we're gonna be sending out in the next few weeks. This is gonna send notification to the body worn camera vendors that we're looking for body worn cameras. These are the requirements we're looking for, and it gives them the opportunity to respond with whether or not they can meet those requirements and estimated cost for providing those requirements. We're gonna evaluate those responses that we get back from the vendors, and then we'll make a selection for the top vendor, and then we'll test the system to make sure that it functions in the way in which they presented that it would function. At the conclusion of that, we'll do some contract negotiations, and we'll take the contract before City Council for approval. After we get an approved contract in place, then that goes back to that training component that we talked about before. We're gonna have to train the whole department and train anybody else that's gonna have access to that video on the body worn camera system. And then we're gonna deploy the body cameras. We were estimating that we're gonna be able to deploy about 500 cameras before the end of this fiscal year, and hopefully we're gonna start deployment this summer. And our deployment strategy at this time is gonna start in the downtown area at headquarters with the walking beat and the officers assigned to Central West Command, which is in that same building. So at this point, that concludes my presentation, and we're gonna open it up to any questions that you guys have.
And it may seem a little silly since we're a small group, but we are gonna use a microphone because we're recording this for rebroadcast on ATXN. So my colleague Joe Goodman is here. So we'll do this, the old-fashioned way in terms of folks that are here that have questions. Just raise your hand and Joe will come over to you. I'll intersperse some questions we've gotten through social media and text messaging, but I think we can start right over here.
My name is Millie Thompson. I'm a criminal defense attorney. Routinely, APD officers will turn off the audio recorders on the mic on their uniform. Will they have the same discretion to turn off the video cameras as they do now with the audio recording?
Are you talking about just turning off the audio portion of the video?
Any discretion at all? Well, how much discretion will officers be given to turn off these body cams?
At the conclusion of the incident is when they're gonna be permitted to turn off the camera.
So they have more discretion now to turn off their audio mics than they will with body cams?
There is some discretion that's provided for them now in the in-car cameras to turn off the microphone for training purposes or for private conversations.
They no longer have that discretion with the installation of body cameras.
I don't believe the body cameras are gonna have the ability to just turn off the audio portion of it.
And if you're experiencing that a lot, can you send me an email with a monitor? Because we'd like to know about the systems.
Throw in a
Because it's very limited when they can turn it off now. So it's happening a lot, I'd like to know about it.
Got a couple of hands over here, so let me throw in just a couple of questions related to that. One question from Twitter was, will body cameras be on for every incident? You kind of started to speak to that. Can you just kind of clarify that?
And so anytime an officer is dispatched to a call for service, the body camera is gonna be required to be turned on
For any service goal.
for any call for service that officers responded to.
And then kind of related to her question, what if we only had video recording when the officers left the car, but had audio going 24/7? Sounds like what you're saying is the technology doesn't separately control video and audio. Is that your assessment?
Right, well, that would go also against the law that doesn't allow a department to require the officer to have it turned on all the time. So the requirement to have it turned on is going to be a call for service or one of those other things that we talked about. But the trigger at the door is going to be one of the key features for officers that are assigned to a patrol car.
Gentleman in the maroon shirt. We have sorry about the inconvenience, but we just want to make sure your questions are heard. Thank you.
Hi, I've got a list of questions. Can I ask them all or?
Well, let me see if I can get the list up here, and then we'll see what we have. So go ahead.
I would like more detailed criteria of when a police officer can turn the camera off. That seems to be a big sticking point for me. I also would like to know what's the process for determining which officers are gonna be assigned the cameras initially? Is it gonna be officers with, bad behavior that's been cited, or is it gonna be your, Boy Scouts, and who's it gonna be that gets the cameras? I would like to know,
And process for choosing officers to get the cameras in the initial deployment, is that right?
that's correct. In situations where an officer behavior or action is the issue, isn't the ability to turn the camera off counterproductive? If a video is released illegally and specifically, illegally, who specifically is fined? Is it the officer, is it the city? Is it the person who, like, who gets fined?
If the
City?
body cam video is released in contradiction to state law,
Yes.
who would be held liable? Is that your
Yes.
question? Okay.
And would they be open to civil suit?
Okay.
So if it's the city, would it be the police department or would it be the individual officer?
Okay.
Is it possible to marry the recording button to the radio so that when an officer calls in an action or an event, that it automatically starts recording? I think that would be pretty effective, because everything gets called in, right?
So
I don't think that I can answer that, I don't believe that trigger exists.
Well, couldn't we make it exist? That seems-
Well, yeah, but we're not the engineers, we can ask for that, but it doesn't exist.
we'll capture it anyway. So a recording button that clicked on, that was triggered by the radio, use of the radio.
How much video is watched during an audit, and will there be civilian oversight in the video auditing process?
So how much video is reviewed during the audit, and what civilian oversight, if any?
Who will manage the storage, the data storage? All the video collected, who actually manages the servers and the software, and who's gonna be overseeing that process?
Okay.
And lastly, what's the repercussion for an officer not using the camera on an individual basis or on a chronic basis?
Okay. Only based on the fact that I think that's a Texas State shirt, I hope you're getting some credit for all your work. I tell you what, let me collect a few other questions so that maybe we can kind of answer them all at once. So, wow, Pandora's box has been opened. Green fleece first, and then we'll come over here. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Travis. I'm a student at the University of Texas at Austin.
Yes, sir.
My question was, who will have, in the department will have access to the footage, and what are the consequences for tampering and or leaking the footage?
Leaking, was that the last part of what you said? Releasing it unauthorized? Okay. Who has access, and what are the penalties for tampering with or leaking the footage? Okay. I called on this lady here, and then I'll come back over to this side. Sorry to identify you by articles of clothing.
At traffic stops in particular, can you create an opt-in process? You already have to collect data as part of the racial profiling law. Could you have a checkbox where people agree at that moment that they opt in to the release of that video, and therefore it could be released later?
Could we, as APD, could APD provide an opt-in process for the citizen
To choose.
in a traffic stop situation to choose to
That's
release the video? Okay. Come over to the red sweater. It's not red, it's more magenta.
I'm more of a tech nerd, local citizen. I was just wondering, I don't know what your current situation is with the onboard cameras, how you actually store the data, whether it's a local server or whether you upload to the cloud during recording. And I was curious, I know most of the cameras on the market now only have like 8 gigs of storage, and what you were planning on doing as far as recording that much data during a traffic stop or anything really, and how it gets stored and then later uploaded to your system.
So more detail about the storage system being used for the data captured on the cameras. Come back over here, the gentleman in the brown. I'll get to everybody, I promise.
If you could clarify again, I noticed in incidences where there's an officer involved shooting, there was language about nothing can be released until the investigation is complete or the process is complete. It was Does that mean until there's been a trial, or is that charges have been filed, et cetera?
You're referring to state law language
Yes.
to that effect? Yeah, I was reading that myself. And Commander Reyes, I want to make sure, we're talking about SB 158. Is that the statute that we're talking about? Okay. So he's asking a question about what does it mean regarding an officer-involved shooting in terms of when the department could release that video, because that's called out in the law. The gray sweater in the back, and then I'll keep going.
I have to say, I'm a criminal defense attorney, so my position is probably different than most people in the room. I have watched tons of police videos where they shut off either the audio or the video at key portions. And I just want to make sure they can't do that now with the new system.
Your question is, will they be able to
Will
do
they
that?
be able to? And
Will
my second question is about privacy. If all these videos can be public records accessed by the public, my clients may not want things to be public, and I may not want them to be public until their case is resolved. So what's the time frame for allowing them to be shown to the public or for someone to access it?
Okay, and I know we talked about the person in the video who's not the officer has to give some consent, but we'll come back to that. Gentleman in the glasses, and I'll come around over here. I think we had a few hands.
How much of the budget for body cameras is on the storage of data versus the actual cost or leasing of the device? And if a body camera...
Give me 1 second. We're just trying to budget for data storage versus the equipment.
And when a criminal investigation is triggered, is that handled internally or through a third party like the Texas Rangers?
A criminal investigation as it relates to the release of
Yeah,
footage?
Or if a police incident, officer action triggers a criminal or administrative investigation, is that a third party or internal investigation?
Okay. So in the cases where the footage has been improperly released,
Sure.
is that investigated by an independent, an outside party or internally?
Correct.
Okay.
And then I know other local municipalities have been doing this for up to 4 years. Have you taken any advice from other local area police departments?
What advice have we gotten from other cities? All right. I'll come around over here. This gentleman gets special privilege because he has my same first name. That's
My name is
just,
Larry. My question is, as you were talking, I was kind of getting mixed signals as to where this camera might be located on the uniform. Will it be a mandatory place or designated area on the uniform that the camera is going to be worn? And second part to that would be from the time of a major incident at the site of the incident to where does it go from there? And then how long is it before it can be released to the public?
all right. So more about the disclosure and then the location. Good question. Right here.
And my question is, what type of documentation will be required from the officer if they do not activate the camera or if they turn it off?
What kind of records does the officer have to keep if there's an issue with their camera? I see a hand over here, striped shirt.
On the random monthly audits, what is that process going to require? You know, if there is some finding in regards to that random auditing, what process will be followed if there is an incident that is found, and then how would that be disclosed?
So what's the procedure if impropriety is turned up during an audit? Okay. Doesn't mean you can't ask questions later, but yes, sir.
I think some of these questions might be best answered immediately, as opposed to having a really long laundry list if they're not simple answers. So I'd appreciate a quick answer on this one. So on January 1st, 2012, as you know, I observed 2 Austin police officers violating a woman's rights and assaulting her. She was never convicted of a crime. She wasn't even suspected of a crime at the time that was legally warranted. Because I tried to take pictures of the police officers and tried to question those police officers, they assaulted me and charged me with a false felony crime that I did not commit, a felony crime I didn't commit. It took us 2 years and 9 months to get.
So the question about
no.
body camera policy
If you'll let me finish.
No, actually, I have a lot more questions to get to.
Well,
so I need to.
Well,
ask you just
this
what
is more than a policy question. This is a APD question as to how they're actually going to.
So
follow through.
What's the question?
So the question is, well, there's two parts to this, okay?
Okay.
Just humor me for a second. 2 years and 9 months, that's how long it took us to get the dash cam video. There was also a surveillance video that was exculpatory evidence that they did not provide us. We did not even, we had to tell the city that we had it before they admitted that they had it.
So it's a question about the timing of the release.
If you'll let me finish, you'll get it. So, considering that APD has tried to suppress dash cam and surveillance video in the past, you know, that shows their cops committing felony crimes, why should we trust APD will somehow treat body cameras differently than dash cams?
Why should we expect APD to treat footage from body cameras different than in-car? Okay, anything else? Okay. Don't see any other hands at the moment. Let me get to a couple of, was there? Oh, I'm sorry.
Really simple. Some of the vendors for these body cameras are offering a feature that allows facial recognition software to be included. Is that something that APD would be interested in at any time now or in the near future?
What about facial recognition on the cameras? Okay. Hand in the back, yes, sir.
What's up, Chief? A question for body cameras, and this is Chad. Yeah. Would the Office of the Police Monitor be able to see this footage from the body cameras as well? And since we're here, would you, because body cameras are to expand police accountability, at some point would APD be willing to back the statement that Margot Frazier and the Police Monitor Office need subpoena power?
Okay. So, separate from body cams, just in general, your question about subpoena power?
Sure.
Okay. So, would the Office of Police Monitor have subpoena power to subpoena? Can we limit it to footage in this case? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. Would it have subpoena power to subpoena video from the cameras?
Well, the police monitor's office gets to see any video related to any complaint now on body cameras. And in-car cameras would be the same with body cameras. And they accompany our investigators in all interviews and all interrogations. So the answer is yes, they will have complete access.
All right, let me add a few from social media, and then we'll be able to finally get to some additional answers. Appreciate y'all's patience. Question, will body cams be worn by officers while they're working in ERs, emergency rooms? So will body cameras be worn in ERs? What would happen if all available spares were unavailable or malfunctioning? I assume that means spare cameras. What would happen if all available spare cameras were unavailable or malfunctioning, and how will that be avoided? Why not record enhanced video as well as the required unenhanced video? Question about enhanced. Going through the Twitter stream here. We talked about whether will officers be able to control when cameras are on or off. I think we covered, we have that question listed. What is the procedure for citizens to view footage? Maybe we'll just come back to that since I think I have a question related to that. And that is the extent of what I have on, just got another, no, that's what I've got on Twitter, and I've got another hand. Yes, ma'am.
Are the videos only to be used for criminal investigation, or might you be able to use them to enhance any officer training programs for de-escalating situations nonviolently, and so on and so forth? Will you be able to use those videos for training purposes or only criminal investigations?
Can footage be used?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can use those videos for training purposes.
There was one, this wasn't really a question, but for transparency's sake, this was texted to us. And by the way, if folks want to use that feature, you can text the word camera to 512-842-4750. That's 512-842-4750. You text the word camera. The text reads, "My fiance was hit on his bicycle, and because of the officer's negligence in handling of the case and not ticketing the woman, We had to sue Progressive, I assume the insurance, to get them to cover his medical expenses. We had to fight to get the dash cam video that showed the officer made statements that showed he had a clear bias against cyclists. A body camera could have showed how he dismissed the witnesses who stopped to help without even taking statements. So I don't know of any specific question in there, but that was a comment that was made. All right, so, Commander, times when the camera can be off.
Yeah, so once the camera's turned on as required, a call for service, or when they can only turn it off once all law enforcement action is concluded. I think that's kind of self-explanatory that if an officer responds to the scene, when they're done with the call for service, and all law enforcement action is completed, then they'll be permitted to turn the camera on.
For folks that aren't as familiar, is the conclusion of it like when the person closes the door or when they get back into their vehicle? How do you define it?
It can vary depending on what type of incident it is. Like if it's a crash and they've interviewed everyone and they're just waiting for a tow truck, then no more law enforcement action is likely to occur, so they'd be able to turn it off in that instance. If they're responding to a disturbance, if an arrest is made, then the camera has to be kept on until that person is actually transported and booked into jail. So it's just going to vary depending on what type of incident they're responding to.
Is that covered?
Well, booked into jail is good. That is a very, very exact situation.
And let me add one other thing about, we have a disciplinary matrix, which is actually kind of a document that has somewhat of policy violations defined and penalty ranges. And when it comes to failure to have your in-car camera on, and a critical incident involving the use of deadly force occurs, it calls for indefinite suspension, regardless of the propriety of the critical incident. And we are going to adopt that same policy with the body-worn cameras.
Question.
Why is it loss of life? If somebody gets roughed up and there's no video.
Well, the rest of them is case specific, depending on the circumstances. But we want to make sure that guys and ladies know that if they end up getting in a critical incident where somebody ends up dying or seriously injured and it's not on, that is right off the bat, it's indefinite suspension. The other ones are specific to the case, dependent on the officer, the circumstances, the totality of the circumstances on what the penalty would be.
And one of the other things about turning the camera off is in the legislation as well, is that, for example, if an officer is interviewing a vulnerable victim, the officer can have the discretion to turn off the camera. And now, if an officer does turn it off under those circumstances, he does have to articulate in his offense report the reasoning why he turned the camera off. So that's another situation. No more law enforcement action is likely to occur merely interviewing a witness or a victim.
Good. There was a question about how you'll choose which officers specifically get the cameras at first.
So basically, in doing that, the first place that they're going to be deployed is in the downtown region. One, because the officers that work down there now don't have cameras like we have in the cars. And then at that same station where those officers are is the Central West officers. So that's going to be the first place where they're deployed. And then from there, it's going to go to the East Substation, which is Charlie and Henry sectors. And then from there, it's going to be by substation. So it has to be facility-based because of the infrastructure and the requirements for uploading. So the choosing of the officers is based on where their station is.
Reorganizing personnel.
And if there's a problematic officer that we need to transfer to a location to use that as a management tool, that is something we definitely would consider transferring somebody into the initial stations.
Are there plans to reorganize personnel at this point?
No.
What
At
happens?
any level. Not a huge macro level, but at any level.
Not at
One or two guys, 3 or 4.
Well, if anybody comes up on the radar, that's always an option we have. Years ago, before we even had body cameras or in-car cameras, if I had a guy or lady that had a lot of complaints, I used to make them carry a little cassette tape. And as the sergeant told me, you will record every one of your contacts before we even had any of these tools. So that is an option that we will be on the lookout for. And if you have an issue with somebody that you've had an interaction with, you can always let the police line know, and we can always consider moving them.
There's a question about what happens when the officer inappropriately turns off the camera.
We already covered that. It'll be fact specific. And I don't remember on top of my head what the matrix says right now for less than indefinite suspension. I think it's fact specific, but maybe fact specific.
In the case of someone who illegally releases the video, who is penalized? How's that?
So we talked about that in the law, that it's a violation of the law for someone to release the video without authorization from the department, and that is a criminal violation. It is a Class A misdemeanor. So if it is found that an officer or a member of the department released a video inappropriately, then they would be held to that law.
The individual officer would be held accountable.
The individual that unlawfully releases the video will be subject to the criminal charges, which is a Class A misdemeanor. For peace officers, if you're convicted of a Class A misdemeanor, you end up losing your peace officer license. You cannot be a police officer in the state of Texas with Class A
Is the
misdemeanor.
city liable for any city suit under?
Well, I'm sure we're liable. I'm sure there could be civil litigation, but that's a different matter. The law doesn't talk about civil litigation. The law talks about criminal sanctions for somebody who unlawfully, without authorization, releases the video.
I had a follow-up just from this.
Yeah, is the disciplinary matrix that you've referenced available for the public to look at? Is it posted on your website?
Yes, it is.
Is it currently up?
And I believe that the monitor has it on her website as well.
And it's currently updated to include how you're going to handle cases where the camera is off?
Body worn
and
cameras?
other-
No, we don't have the cameras yet, but it will be.
It's not in there yet?
Not yet, no ma'am.
Okay.
Follow up. From the time of the incident, what is the proper protocol or procedure from the scene to wherever the video ends up?
Are you referencing when the video is going to be downloaded?
Wherever it happened from the scene, and then where does it go from there? Who's handling it?
There,
What is the proper?
there are a variety of methods for uploading the video depending on which vendor is selected, and those vary from when the officer gets off shift, he would dock the video at the substation and it would upload, or a wireless upload, similar to what we have in the car.
For that point, when you say download at the station, I'm trying to get personnel
Yeah.
more than anything else. I understand the video procedures and process of video and getting the recording itself, but I'm talking about who's actually handling it from one person to the next.
It's going to be the individual officer who actually if it's a docking mechanism, the officer will dock the body camera and the video will upload. If it's a wireless upload feature, it'll automatically wire load as soon as they hit the stop button from inside the car, or when they drive into the substation or a wireless hotspot.
So
Our in-car videos now, when the officer drives into the substation, as soon as they turn off the car, it automatically uploads onto the server.
So it sounds like the individual officer is ultimately responsible for. Does that answer your question? I see your hand, sir, but I'm gonna get through these and then I'll come back to related to this.
Is it gonna have removable media on the cameras?
No.
Okay. There was a question about could we?
We don't want any lost media, if that makes any sense. So we want it to make it as fail-proof as possible. So there's no this at the dog ate the media type of situation. So our in-car camera, go ahead, Mario.
If I may, I think one of his concerns earlier was you mentioned officer-involved shootings, and I would let me just reassure the public that I would expect that if there was an officer-involved shooting, we wouldn't be letting the officer who had the camera on his body walk away with it. That would be taken by the Special Investigation Unit as part of the crime scene protection at that time. So
Okay.
that becomes a whole different world, as you can well imagine.
I was referring to routine patrol, but in incidents like that, we do have a process in place where.
All right. There was a question about whether we could set the technology so that the camera would begin recording when an officer engaged the radio, and I think the earlier answer was we don't. That doesn't exist.
Well, send me a note on that to figure it out. We'll look at that.
To what degree would there be civilian oversight of the audit review of camera usage? I guess either Ms. Fraser's office or the general public in terms of seeing the results of an audit.
Yeah, the audit reviews that the supervisors conduct are conducted by the supervisor. There is no civilian oversight in that process. The police monitor does have the ability to review any video that's part of a complaint.
What reporting it?
There are consequences for that.
What,
Depends on the circumstances. We suspended supervisors for 15, 20 days for not taking a complaint, not taking action. So it depends on the severity of the circumstances, and I can tell you that there will be there will be action taken.
If they're not reporting it, then there's no record. There's no outside, oversight.
No, we also have, for us, we also have our inspections unit and our risk management unit that actually does audits on the audits and actually does audits on the commands. And we also have different commands do peer audits. So we have different levels of audits by different entities. And you're talking about outside entities. We don't have any.
Where does the blue wall get broken? Where does the blue wall get broken by this?
Well, I think if you go to the police monitor's office, you're going to find plenty of instances where our audit system and our process systems have uncovered, not complaints, not anybody else, but our own internal systems have uncovered misconduct and we've taken appropriate action. We had a 90-day suspension last month, and that was not because of a complaint, but our internal processes in the response to resistance process. The sergeant and his command did their job, and I think there was plenty of examples of that.
Do you know, Margaret, do you know the percentage of complaints that are officer initiated as opposed to external?
Majority of the complaints are internal complaints, but it gets a little bit skewed because it also includes like traffic accidents and things, but there are a great number of internal complaints, and there are cases that have generated. So for example, there's an incident, and when we get a complaint from a member of the community, and in the process of that, we raise the question, or the department itself raises the question as to how did this ever get by, like a use of force review, and the person at those levels picks up then their own case. Now, it has quite a little domino effect.
Okay. There are a number of different questions related to the storage of the data. This was a question about the management of the data storage. There's a question on Twitter about how much storage space, like servers, will the APD need to buy in order to store videos. I know we had another question that related to how specifically will it be stored, whether it be local server in the cloud. Can you kind of speak to storage generally?
So currently with our in-car system, we do have an on-site server where we store all of that media. We are looking to move the storage hosted solution to a cloud storage for our body-worn camera system. And so the amount of media that we need is yet to come. I mean, it depends on which body camera vendor selected, how many megabytes per hour of video that covers, and so on. So we'll get more information about the cost of that storage when we go out for solicitation.
Anything else related to storage? I know that was an interest to a few folks. Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you I don't know if you were concerned at all about like data loss if you're talking about wireless uploading, like you lose packets. Like not concerned with like the officer doing anything incorrectly, but just technology being what it is, like losing information, and if there's like that's why I was thinking if you had like redundancy as far as like storage is concerned.
Yeah, in the cloud upload system, there is redundancy built into those systems currently. The systems that we have now, we use wireless upload for those, and to my knowledge, we haven't lost any video that's uploaded wirelessly.
All right.
And I like the fact that it is, the way we do it right now is the officers never touch the camera. They drive in, the system automatically starts uploading it wirelessly through the WAN there at the station. And if we could do that, to me, the less human interaction, the better off. And so that's something that we are going to be looking at very closely.
Question about the penalties, and I think this kind of relates to an earlier question, penalties for releasing footage in an unauthorized way. Yeah, Class A misdemeanor.
There's a Class A misdemeanor, a criminal offense, and then also there would be an administrative policy violation associated with that.
There was a question related to whether a citizen could opt in to have their video released in the case of a traffic stop.
I believe that the way that the law is written, it does require written consent on a per incident basis to be assigned waiver for that request for that footage. So I don't believe that the opt-in option is available.
Did that take care of your question?
I think that's debatable.
Your question had something to do with racial profiling as well, right?
Well, that was just a procedural sort of how it could fit into how the officer has to track certain kinds of information at the end of a stop anyway. I don't believe there's anything in the law that would prohibit a person from actively selecting or being asked and selecting to, yes, I would like to have that video released, whether the officer was awesome or the officer was not awesome.
Like initial box or initial by a box or something?
That's right, just a checkbox opt-in like we all experience in our lives in all kinds of circumstances.
I don't know, I wouldn't want my face out there I was getting a ticket. I'm not sure how many people are gonna
And you
opt
would
in.
not opt in, you would opt out. I would like you all to reconsider looking at the law with that in mind. Because I think, you know, thinking about it, we want to protect people's privacy, but not be patronizing towards people with respect to video that they might themselves actually like to share with the world. So giving people an opt-in is almost the best privacy protection because it gives people control over their data. So, you know, looking at the way the statute is written, particularly with respect to traffic stops, it seems to me that there's room there to create such a system and, you know, see what people choose to do.
All right. There was a question, a few questions really involving officer-involved shootings and the release of the video in terms of the interpreting of the state law about how long you have to retain the footage, I think was the primary thrust of the question. I don't remember whose question this was.
There was also too, it mentioned it could only be released after, that the video could only be released in those cases after a certain point.
Yes.
What is that point?
So how does the department interpret that part of the law that says you have to hold on to the video in these cases until it's finally adjudicated?
When we get into the criminal offenses, you know, that's gonna be a partnership that we have with the district attorney's office, who's also gonna be conducting an investigation into that incident. We wanna make sure that any videos that are released, that we do take into consideration the criminal investigation. And if we have to, then, you know, like we do currently with our in-car cameras, sometimes we do have to go out and get an attorney general's opinion as to whether or not that video could be released. But the way that the provision in the law does state until the investigation of the incident is concluded. So I think in those criminal investigations, that would be a partnership between the police department and the district attorney's office to determine whether or not that investigation is being concluded.
And the DA has a policy that at the conclusion of the grand jury process or the prosecution process, she releases all the tapes. And Gary Cobb is here from the DA's office. I think he can confirm that as well.
Follow-up, so if an officer suspected of murder, but he's never indicted, it's never presented to the grand jury, that technically could be shielded from release forever because it's never been concluded. Is that how you're interpreting that?
I think the investigation is concluded at that time. If there's no, if the grand jury no bills, then there's no further investigation.
If
So
it's never presented to the grand jury. If it's never presented to the grand jury and the statute of limitations is for life, then
I think what she's asking is, does that sort of extend the timeline because it hasn't been finally resolved? And so therefore you could theoretically, I guess, make the case that it wouldn't be releasable because it hasn't been finally resolved. Does that make sense?
well, I think at some point the investigation would be concluded.
It's when APD would conclude its investigation that the matter would be considered closed and the video would be releasable. Is that what you're saying?
completely APD's discretion on.
No, it would be the Attorney General's discretion. If we said no, the Attorney General would have to weigh in.
Did that answer your question? Well, you're shaking your head no, so let me.
I'm gonna say, yeah, Ms. Thompson raises an interesting issue. I would hope it would, quite frankly, remain only a hypothetical issue because I know that in the past, at least, the policy of the district attorney's office has been to present every case officer-involved shooting to a grand jury. Not always as quick as perhaps all of us would like to see happen. But yeah, I think it would be an interesting issue, and I think that if they didn't then someone could force the issue by some sort of writ of mandamus or something, and it'd probably have to be a court action, but I think there'll be, unfortunately, there'll be someone within our great state of Texas that will play try to use the law to their advantage to keep from getting out of video at some point.
Which ties in well with this question, which is the time frame for accessing video. So let's say I make the request along the parameters you said. What's the expected amount of time it would take the department to release it?
I believe that the time established by law is 10 days to respond to a request for a video. So.
Okay.
Yeah, but then at day 10, you guys send a letter saying that you're going to appeal to the Attorney General, and then criminal defendants have not received their dash cam videos for well over 2 years on cases that they've actually had to defend themselves against. Why is it that you guys all of a sudden are going to be concerned about releasing these videos to criminal defendants with body cameras when you're not with dash cameras?
There are requirements in place that if it's an ongoing criminal investigation that's subject to Attorney General opinion. But I believe there's also requirements in place for the county and district attorney's office through discovery process that those videos are shared. That has nothing to do with the police department.
Right, and there's also requirements that you're supposed to share exculpatory evidence, and that does not happen either. So there's a big difference between policy and law and how you guys actually act. And you guys have a history, you and the attorney, county attorneys and city attorneys have a history of violating the law and violating policy when it comes to video. And so my question is why are body cameras going to be somehow different than the way you guys treat dash cameras?
Are you still in litigation with us? I'm not gonna sit here and debate.
Every single charge that you guys brought.
Okay, I'm not gonna sit here, Antonio, and make this we're gonna follow the law, and and we're not following the law, then file a complaint or file a lawsuit. I mean, what do you want me to say to you?
I just want you to say that you're going to follow
We're gonna follow the law we're gonna follow the law to the best of our ability. Once we prosecute, we don't determine what gets released. The district attorney of the county, we're not the prosecutors. We provide it all to them, and they decide when to release it. We don't get to make that decision, and I don't know how the discovery process is, but I'm sure that at some point they're supposed to share all that.
I do have a question in the back. Is this related to what we're talking about here?
It's similar to what we mentioned earlier. I wanted to mention it. First, thank you all for being here and for doing this. I think with body cameras, the keys are trust and transparency, that we get what actually happened. So I think we need to just make sure that we ensure that there's teeth to discipline officers if they, in fact, turn off the cameras when they're supposed to be on. I thought I heard you mention earlier that the initial, I guess, discipline would be an indefinite suspension. So I guess my question is, would that be enough, or should it be something to where if the camera gets turned off when it was not supposed to be, it starts off where an officer would likely be terminated, and they have the ability to make an affirmative defense saying, well, no, this is why it was off. Because I think the key for the community is ensuring that we actually get the footage. If we don't get the footage, then the entire thing is just a big show for everyone.
So are you saying that by starting a termination, that would make it easier for the
That's
department?
what indefinite suspension is, it's termination.
Okay. So that would make it possible to release the footage, I think is what he's...
No, I'm just making sure that we have enough teeth behind ensuring that the officers...
Death or a severe injury. That was the punishment for death or severe injury.
And the rest is case specific. There's a difference between, I'm standing here and all of a sudden something breaks up right here. It may not be that, unreasonable that I'm gonna worry about this instead of taking immediate action. So we gotta look at the totality of the circumstances in those cases. The reason that I make that we, for cases of use of deadly force, have made that an indefinite suspension from day one is that sends a really strong message to the officers that, you know what, if I'm finding myself in a situation, I better have that camera on because I am automatically going to lose my job. But no matter what the circumstances are, even if it's less than the fatality situation, critical incident situation, the rest of them are fact specific, based on the totality of the circumstances and based on the officer's history and everything else. So each one will be a little different. But when somebody dies or somebody's seriously injured because of us in a critical incident, it says it for the in-car cameras, and it will say it for body cameras, it will be indefinite.
And
I think that has an effect, because you don't know when you're gonna get involved in a critical incident. So I think that having that highest standard for that critical incident encourages. Now, the other thing is I keep hearing from a couple of defense attorneys that guys and ladies are turning off their audio. That concerns me, and when every time you have those cases, those instances, send me and the monitor an email, please, with the case number, because we will look at each and every case. Turning that off should be the exception, and it certainly should not be the rule. And so we need to know about that.
But that's not an OPM issue.
Excuse me for just a second. Excuse me for just a second. Excuse me for a second, Commander Reyes.
I was just gonna say, and that goes back to one of our requirements for the cameras about making sure that that camera comes on when the officer opens the door, because we want it to be on. You know, we don't want the officer to go out and then have to turn it on physically. So by that camera turning on when the officer opens the door, that's gonna assure us that that camera's on. And if it's turned off, it's because the officer turned it off.
Would there be a way to have it also turned off when the officer comes back in the car? Or is that not a technology?
To turn off?
So the camera turns on automatic when the door opens. Is there a way to do it the same way?
No, he'll just have to physically turn it off.
Okay.
And I wouldn't want an automatic turn it off, because then you might have an excuse to why it was off. When that door opens, that camera goes on. The only way I want it to come off is if the officer physically turns it off, to try to limit the circumstances under which they're gonna have an excuse for it to be off.
All right, folks, before I get other hands, I just want to respect the folks who already submitted questions and do my best to get through these. The other storage question had to do with the percentage of the budget that would be needed for storage versus the cameras themselves. It sounds like you're not sure about that.
It's not parsed out specifically about how much is for the camera and how much is for storage. We did include some personnel in that budget for this year, but as far as the funding for the program, it's a program in whole, so it's not.
Okay, well then, do you expect purchasing or leasing the cameras? With the rapid evolution of camera technology, is it just gonna be whatever the RFP comes back as?
When we go through the solicitation process, you know, I think what you're talking about is a camera refresh. I think that's something that we've seen in other cities when they've gone out, that there's a built-in camera refresh every 2 or 3 years that the hardware is replaced. So.
I think you're getting to the crux. The money's gonna be made, the true cost is gonna be data storage. I mean, that's gonna be, the manufacturers are gonna make it, the purchase of the camera, that's gonna be, they're reducing the price point, because they want 800,000 cops to have these, so then they have 800,000, men and women running around creating data where the money's really going to be for the private sector is going to be in the storage. And so the problem for us is we don't know exactly how much storage we're going to need at this point, because it is in infancy. But one of the things that we are going to be looking at is not just how much the cost of the camera is, but what is the replacement deal that comes with it as it continues to evolve. And secondly, we're really going to be interested in the cost of the storage, because we know that long term is going to be the biggest investment for the taxpayers in our city.
All right, let me get through some other questions that we have up here, and then I'll try to get to other hands. If in fact someone criminally releases footage, meaning improperly, who would do the investigation? Would it be handled internally by the Texas Rangers, others?
Our Special Investigations Unit conducts all criminal investigations, allegations against any officer in the department.
And that's the same for the turning on or off of cameras?
No, that's a policy violation. That would be conducted by.
Administrative?
That'd be administrative, conducted by the police, the Internal Affairs Department, with oversight from the police.
So all that will be internal and no outside parties?
The administrative investigation is conducted by the Internal Affairs Unit with oversight from the Police Monitor's Office.
What advice have you gleaned from other cities that already have body-worn cameras, was the question asked?
Yeah, we have reached out to some of the early adopters of body-worn cameras and got some lessons learned from them, especially when it comes to the solicitation process, so we did take those things into consideration.
Where on the uniform might a body-worn camera be?
Again, different manufacturers have different mounting options. It could be anywhere from the center of the chest to the right part of the chest, and some of them actually have attachments to put it up on the headpiece. So as we go through the solicitation process and a vendor is selected, the appropriate placement of that camera will most likely be vendor specific, but sometimes it will allow the officer some options as to where they're gonna have it.
What kind of documentation would be required by the officer if the officer turned off the camera inappropriately?
Inappropriately?
Yes, I think that was the intent of the question, not just why did you turn it off? That was, yes. In other words, if they turned it off before the police action was, law enforcement action was complete.
Or a use of force situation.
Or use of force.
So what type of documentation would be completed?
Yeah, they
That-
turn it off.
That would trigger an administrative investigation through the internal affairs process if an officer was found to have turned their camera off improperly when they weren't supposed to.
I think that we covered some about the audit procedures before, but maybe if you could briefly reiterate how the audits would work in terms of the supervisors auditing camera usage.
And so we currently have the system in place now with our in-car system, and the supervisors randomly select a video, they watch the entirety of the video, and they observe the behavior of the officer and look for any policy violations. And then, as Chief Acevedo said, our risk management and our inspections unit conducts audits of those audits that the supervisors turn in. They're required to document the audits that they do. They actually put the case number of the incident that they reviewed, and they have a check sheet that they complete, and they turn that, the first line supervisor submits that to their lieutenant, and then there's some additional audits and checks and balances that way. So it is documented exactly which video that they watched and what the outcome of that was.
And one of the
Earlier
things that's
question
happening out at
was
Stanford,
asked.
excuse me, one other thing for the audits that I think is really important. One of the things that's being developed right now in Stanford, I'm trying to look up the doctor's name, is actually automated audit system that with voice inflections, certain voice inflections and everything else, that it will actually, in an automated fashion, help audit these tapes. And one of the things that really concerns me, if I get video, I want to audit as much as I can. And so I really predict in the next couple of years, you're going to see some pretty good automated technologies to help audit based on some of the voice. And I'm not, I don't know how to explain it, but I think it's coming. That will make it even better.
There was an earlier question, why should we expect the APD to treat body-worn cameras differently than they've treated in-car cameras?
I think we already answered that question earlier about we're going to comply with the law to the best of our ability, and that's what we're going to do.
On facial recognition technology.
Yeah, we don't have anything that we're looking at right now to integrate facial recognition into the software that we're getting for body cameras.
Would the Office of Police Monitor have, what kind of access would the Office of Police Monitor have to video from body-worn cameras, and would they have subpoena power? I heard you speak to that earlier, but can you remind us?
Yeah, the Police Monitor has access to any video where an officer is being investigated for an administrative complaint. As far as the subpoena power goes, the Police Monitor does not currently have subpoena power, and that's the powers of the Police Monitor are established by contract.
Her subpoena power is to pick up the phone and tell me I want to see something. And believe me, as long as it's not prohibited by law, I would she's my eyes and ears. I would let her see anything she needs to see.
Although, if I may, I think one of the things that the public needs to realize, and the chief is correct, whenever I have asked the Internal Affairs Division to see a dash cam video, and if I have, or one of my staff have, if they've ever gotten any kind of grief, then they let me know, and I just tell IA, this isn't stopping with you, I'm gonna call the chief, and it is accurate that Chief Acevedo has never said no to me. But, that having been said, separate and apart from the chief, if the members of the public don't file the complaint, then I don't know about it, we can't monitor it, and please do not have some sort of fantasy belief that you can rely on audits to pick up misbehavior. The best way of the public letting the police department know that they're not happy about something is for you to take the time to file a complaint.
Specific question about.
And by the way, the professor, in case you want, especially the kid from the young man from Texas State, it's Professor Jennifer Lynn Eberhard from Stanford, really taking the lead on this, and I really think she's going to have some great things coming out for the automated audits in the next within the next 12 to 24 months.
Question about whether or not body-worn cameras would be worn in emergency rooms. Would there be any exception?
That's secondary employment, and I would say that the chances are in an emergency room setting for secondary employment, I don't think that's going to happen, especially with the HIPAA and all the other issues that related to privacy in the hospital setting.
Follow up to that, you know how your officers do secondary work, you know, at these events. Would that be something that y'all can put in place in the policy where they do not use the body cameras for that? Or will they, what policy is in place right now, or what are y'all looking in regard to secondary employees?
I would say that more than likely this policy will they'll be required if they're in uniform doing police duties, that the policy will require them to have a camera with them. But the hospital is a different environment. If they have a camera issue, remember that this fiscal year, we're looking at 500 cameras, but we have almost 2,000 sworn personnel. So if they have I'd rather have them for law enforcement purposes, for on-duty first, but eventually, once everybody has them, if they're working off-duty employment in uniform as police officers in that kind of capacity, I'm going to require them to have the cameras once we have them all out. With the exception, I'm not sure about hospitals. I don't think we can do
What
it.
about equipment malfunctions?
Yeah, so right now the plan is to have 50 spare cameras at each substations. So those would be spare cameras and also cameras available for officers that are on our side cameras to check out if they are going to work these functions. We only have about 30 officers from each substation that are out on patrol at a time. So having those 50 cameras there is going to be sufficient enough to replace any cameras that are malfunctioning and have cameras available for checkout from officers that are working patrol that don't normally work patrol.
There was a question related to the use of enhanced video.
Yeah, you can only record one type of video on the devices, so I would venture to guess that would require having two cameras on the person to have one enhanced and one not enhanced, so that's just not feasible.
And you answered this, whether the videos could be used for officer training. You said yes. Let me check social media to see if there are any questions that weren't already answered. There was a question, how would you, and this, by the way, is hashtag APD body cam, how would you regulate privacy and domestic incidents in regards to public information requests? I assume that means domestic violence, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and so we talked about that earlier, about the privacy protections in place for those recordings that occur in the private space, and the requester having to have written permission from that person. So that's going to be a protection in place for that.
Just in the interest of transparency, another question was, what will criminals complain about after the cameras show through their BS? Doesn't seem like a question that would be for you. The question is, will the cameras also capture audio? The answer, I think, is yes.
And I think in response to that, in a lot of places, it seems that use of force has gone down, complaints have gone down. It's been I think it's a win for everybody. When people know they're being videotaped, most instances they're going to behave better, and when cops know they're videotaping and they're required to videotape, hopefully that they'll behave better. So I think it's a win all the way around.
What is the retention policy for the recorded video? How long will it be stored? I think you mentioned 90 days except for...
So the minimum is 90 days, and then the retention period for each video is going to be dependent on the type of offense that's being investigated on that video.
And I think that 90-day retention is really important, because if a lot of times people come up to me and they'll say, hey, I was really mistreated by a police officer. Well, when did it happen? Oh, about a year and a half ago. You have to, I really believe that at the end of the day, the most important eyes and ears for this police department is the community we serve. If people don't come forward and complain when we don't do things right, we can't address it. And so that 90-day threshold is really important. If you have an issue, remember you need to come in so we have it on video before the 90 days are up. You know what? That's an interesting. Let me look at the cost. I think that's a really valid point. I like that. But let's look at the cost and we'll consider it depending on what the cost. Because again, it's a balance. I mean, I think 90 days. You have 180. No, here's the problem. I have 180 days. But at the end, I have 180 days. You have 180 days to complain. You have a lifetime to complain. But I, from the day of the incident, have 180 days to complete the investigation and take action. So, at least with 90 days, that leaves me 90 days to investigate and actually suspend or fire somebody. After 180 days, under the law, all I can give somebody is a written reprimand administratively. It's really important.
Let me
So,
just
but
pause.
that was a good thought, Antonio.
Okay, let me pause for just a second. The meeting is scheduled to end at 8. Just show of hands, how many folks still have a question they feel they need to ask? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Gentlemen, you want to stay a little past 8? Do you have the time to do that? All right. Let's try to make these, though, efficient.
So
Mr.
I
Attorney.
think that the body cameras are good for the citizens and good for the police department, therefore good for the community. But do you have exceptions? That is, can the officers turn off their cameras in a case where a citizen says, I don't want to be on the camera because I fear for my life. They reported something, maybe there's some gang activity, drug cartel type stuff, and they legitimately fear for their life.
There is a provision in the law that says that an officer should be allowed the discretion to turn off the body-worn camera system when interviewing witnesses and victims and taking privacy into consideration.
That's
So-
the chilling effect that I think a lot of us in the criminal justice system worry about, and that there will be an exception for that.
Excuse me, sir. I just want to hit folks that haven't gotten to ask anything yet. Yes, sir, in the back.
When are we gonna see the body cam footage from the downtown officers that already wear it? When are you gonna release that to the public? And two, I have filed internal affairs and OPM complaints where I was filming and Officer Griffin assaulted me. I was filming and nothing happened from that, or the civil service protection prevent the public from knowing. Some of the investigations that you were talking about, are the citizens going to be contacted during those extra audits? Are we going to be part of the process, or are all just the police policing themselves?
So you'll have to help me. The first part of your question
When are
was.
we going to get our body cam footage from the downtown officers that currently carry them in the name of transparency?
Yeah, I don't, if a request was made for footage, then that request should be made through our public information office or through our open records department. So if you have a request for specific footage that's out there, then you need to just submit the request.
I just want to acknowledge Councilmember Ora Houston, who quietly sat in the back. Thank you, ma'am, for being here.
I had some. Absolutely no comment. The lady in the gray T-shirt, I know had been waiting for quite a while. I'm sorry.
Thank you. As far as the video that already exists, I know there must be Halo camera footage from the jaywalking incident that's all over the internet, and where the jaywalkers got assaulted. And also there was an incident in June where a filmer, somebody with a video camera, had his camera knocked out of their hand by a police officer, and then another police officer pepper sprayed them. So if we put in a request for that footage, should we expect to get that footage?
Well, the problem with Halo is, it's
Is Halo an acronym, Chief?
Huh?
Is Halo an acronym?
Halo is the high activity location observation. The Halo cameras is that they're stagnant. I mean, we can control moving them, but if it's facing in this direction, we won't have a video. And so what I would say, if you don't trust us, then I would ask for video of this camera at this location between 1 a.m. and 1:05 a.m. and not video of the incident, because you may not have video of the incident, but you'll have video from that camera. Does that make any sense? That would be, and I think that it's time stamped, isn't it? Date and time stamped. So yeah, you have to put in the request, yes, ma'am. I think that the one you're talking about with the jaywalkers, I'm not sure that the Halo, I haven't seen the report yet. I don't think Halo captured was facing in the right direction for that incident. That's the first, I always ask for Halo. By the way. You could, did you put in for it already? You can. What's that?
It just depends on where it was and if we have a camera there.
Yeah, I don't think that the Halo camera captured that. But you can ask for that actual date, time, location, and we can get you the video.
And if you're not sure where the Halo cameras are, they're published on our website and has the location of every camera that we have in the downtown area and the Rutherford area.
Folks who haven't gotten to ask anything yet, lady here.
Hello, I had a question relating to the rapid response and the pre-incident recording. Could it be written into whatever policies you create that, depending on the technology, if it is one of these pedestrian police officers and it has to be human initiated, that it can be that 2-minute minimum?
And that's going to depend on which camera is selected through the solicitation process, because they have a variety of capabilities. And so if we can do that, we're most likely going to, and it's configurable by officers, so the officers that are on downtown that don't have the in-car
I like that
camera
idea very
are going to
much.
have a longer pre-event recording than the officers in the car where it opens when they open the door. So those things are
Thank you.
configurable, and we can do that.
I think that's a really fantastic idea. Because again, data storage is expensive and everything else, and so, but I like the idea of the ones that we're going to issue for officers that are working on foot, on horse, on bicycle, that those officers utilize one with a longer, I like that very much. Thank you for that idea.
Other new questioners? I know I've got some others that wanted to ask a second. Gentleman here, and then we'll get to a couple of others.
Just to piggyback on that question, is there any sort of policy in place to when the downtown officers who are going to be opening a door, when they would have to turn on their camera?
Yeah,
It's the same exact policy as in a car. So if all of a sudden somebody calls out there's a fight at whatever bar and they start running over there, they need to turn the cameras on. But if I'm standing here and all of a sudden these guys start fighting, depending on the circumstances, that might be a circumstance where it might have been, based on the totality of the circumstances, reasonable. But then if you hit that button, within 2 minutes, you should be able to so that's why I really like your idea very much. So they have to have the same exact, follow the same policies.
Gentleman here, and then come over to the green fleece. Yeah.
Chief, my question is about incidents that may occur. I understand that if something is happening and it happens immediately, you might have one police officer on the scene and he's got to do what he's got to do. But there's been times when there's officers that are on the scene and it's not necessary for them to act immediately. Is there a requirement for them to actually call for backup and wait for it to come before they begin to proceed? For example, a number of years ago, we had some young men that were sitting out in a car, wee hours of the night. A single police officer approached the car. I'm thinking that it would have been better in that incident for him to have waited for backup.
Yeah, we have what's called a contact and cover type 2-officer deployment, to minimum 2-officer deployments, and in a lot of cases they're trained to wait for that officer, that secondary cover officer, and so again, it depends on the circumstances, but generally they're encouraged in training that you wait for that backup officer. It depends on the totality of
You have
circumstances.
more eyes and more cameras on the scene.
Well, it's just safer for the officer and for everybody.
Thank you.
The green fleece.
Yeah, I'm still a little fuzzy on when the video gets released in the case where a person isn't seriously injured. So I wanted to just a quick hypothetical. A person is roughed up and feels that they have been mistreated, disrespected, whatever it is. Not a serious injury. Video camera takes the video goes back, the person comes in the next day, files a complaint. I would like you to walk through with me at what point would that video be released to the public?
It would be at the conclusion of the administrative investigation. And we have to, like I was explaining to Mr. Bueller, we have to investigate and take whatever action within 180 calendar days. So the maximum that it would take for you to get that video would be 180 days, absent any criminal charges. Okay, but there's criminal charges, then the DA's office starts playing a role as to the release of the videotape. But I will say this, that as part of that investigation, that more than likely you'd be able to see the video during the interview with the police monitor and with internal affairs. So you'd be able to see it, but you wouldn't be able to have a copy of it until the investigation is complete. Quite honestly, when these video cameras come into place in a lot of places, even in-car cameras, a lot of time people have fuzzy recollections of what really happened, and when they go see and they're showing the video and they come to complain, you know, it's kind of like that cop I talked about with the little cassette tape that kept getting all his complaints. And then 2 weeks later, he comes into my office and says, I need to talk to you. I was a lieutenant, sergeant. I go, what's up? And he says, I'm an asshole. I go, what do you mean? He said, I never realized how I really talk to people until I started listening to myself. So when people actually see their tape sometimes, it might end the complaint right there. So you would be able to see it. You probably wouldn't be able to get it till the administrative investigation is complete. When it comes to critical incidents, when somebody's seriously injured or killed, my policy is that I want the case done in 60 to 90 days. So when I got here in 2007, they give it to me on day 175, you know, this much evidence, say, here, chief, you sort this out, and that wasn't gonna cut it. So now they have to have it within 60 to 90 days.
All right, we are very much over time, so what I'm gonna do is take Mr. Bueller here in the front, this lady, this gentleman, Santa's helper there. I should also remind Chief Acevedo that this meeting will be televised at some point. So
It will? Okay, sorry.
the beeping will be
Well, I just saw adults here, I apologize.
we will assess the charges for beeping to the APD.
I want a little bit of clarification on one thing. So the person who is subject to being recorded, if they request the video, they can get it. But as someone who observes the police, and if I see a police officer being aggressive or violating policy, will I be able to get that video if the only person's name that I know is the police officer? That's my first question. And the second question is, everyone keeps talking about deadly force restrictions on the release of video, and some people have sort of touched upon it. There's obviously other crimes that are very concerning that we would want that video to be released for. And going back into APD history, nothing to do with me, but in 2012, a woman claimed that she was raped by Officer Anthony Martin. When they finally pulled the dash cam, they found out that the dash cam went blank for nearly an hour. That police officer was never disciplined, fired, or charged with sexual assault. And so how do we know that the dash cams, or how do we know that the body cams won't be treated the same as the dash cams were in that instance by Officer Anthony Martin? Thank you.
So the first question had to do with making a request of video if all you have is the officer's name as opposed to a person's name.
The legislature created the law, the provisions are in the law that you have to have the name of a person involved in the incident, and that's the provision of the law.
And as it relates to the second part of this question, any further? Okay. Go to the gentleman here in the sweater, just because he hasn't gotten to ask anything yet.
It sounded to me, kind of listening, that a lot of the concerns that have been raised may be addressed in the policies that are eventually developed for these body cameras. I wondered if you all had kind of already thought through how the community can be involved in providing input, kind of on the more specific policies, particularly the ones that will impact the public, you know, some of the release policies.
Yeah, I think that our plan is once we identify the system, then we go back and finalize the policies. And I hope they have one more community forum where people can see the policy, breathe the policy, have it, maybe make it public for the draft policy for maybe 4 or 6 weeks, whatever, and then let people either weigh in writing or we can have one more forum. But either way, we want to make it public in the draft form, and I'm sure that I don't want to speak for the mayor and council, but I'm sure that we'll be presenting our policy also to the Public Safety Commission and the Public Safety Committee. Public Safety Commission of Council will probably take a look at it before it's finalized, and so I want as much input as possible. This is a really important policy, kind of like we did with the privacy policy with the Austin Regional Intelligence Center, and we'll also send it to all of our partners, including the ACLU, Texas Civil Rights Project, NAACP, LULAC, and some of those groups as well.
Great.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Chief, for coming out here and talking to people. I appreciate that. You've always been open that way, but I think a lot of people in this room are of the mindset of they want to point to the police and watch what they do all the time. and they want to go down and request the videos of every incident that they know about. But I think people do not understand that that can interfere with criminal prosecution in many ways. I mean, my nightmare is that somebody goes down and requests videos of my clients before I've resolved their cases. It invades their privacy, and it prevents the court system from operating the way it needs to operate. And if you are charged with a crime, your attorney can get the video for you and provide it. So that's a simple solution to that problem.
And then I'll turn to my friend in the Christmas spirit.
The chief earlier conceded that being on video causes people to behave better and reduces force, things on this order. But at the same time, we have asserted from the dais here that there's not going to be any civilian oversight in this process, in this program. My concern is that you pull these programs together because there's a crisis of confidence in the police, and you want to create at least a sense of transparency. But what happens is that when you don't have civilian oversight, if it's barred from the official process and it crops up elsewhere, it can't be suppressed in the form of a civilian videotape. So my question really then is this: do you believe that if the civilian videos, the cop watching videos, are actually improving or creating a better environment, are you going to go ahead and protect those programs and consider them part of the package by which the crisis of confidence can be allayed, since civilian oversight is not going to otherwise be part of the program?
I don't understand the question either.
It sounded like you were referring not to videos taken by officers on body cameras, but videos taken by civilians of officers.
But on the principle, see, normally you'd say, okay, now we have body cameras, and they're prevalent. What need do we have for civilian? Because now we have that transparency. But my point is, if it's acknowledged that some more cameras are better, then even more cameras than that in the hands of civilians would improve the results even further.
So are you asking whether city cameras could be provided to civilians for their?
No, I'm interested to know if we could have civilian oversight at the official level, will the department continue to protect civilian oversight in the form of civilian videos being made to improve, reduce force, and improve accountability and transparency?
Right. Well, the ability for civilians to video this, absolutely. I think that's all right. Well, I think that what you're asking is, do we support people videotaping the police? Yes, absolutely. That's your right.
Please stop arresting us.
Okay. Your right is to videotape, not interfere, not to get involved in the actual stop or agitate. There's a difference between videotaping, agitating, interfering, and not obeying very simple command.
Well, interference is actually.
All right.
Is in the policy.
We have gone over I know there are other hands up. I know there are other comments to be made. You all can certainly visit with the officers of the commander and the chief if you care to. But I want to take this opportunity to thank Commander Reyes and Chief Acevedo for their time.
Thank you all for coming out. Appreciate you. Thank you.